Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Barely Bookish podcast. Today, I am joined once again with Candace.
Hi.
We are actually going to be finishing Kindred today, so I won't even hold you up anymore. Let's jump right into the episode. Rufus then also admits he sold Sam because he thought Sam wanted Dana.
Yep.
And then, after that, Rufus is like, tells Dana that her and Alice are two sides of the same coin and that he like kind of wants her, and he's like, you could just take her place. And I'm like,
Yep.
ah! And then so Dana runs upstairs trying to get away. She grabs her knife. This all started happening really, really fast.
Yep. And there's that moment, by the
Mhm.
way. Kevin's like, leave your fucking bag. Stop it. You're being crazy.
Yeah.
You're being paranoid.
If she didn't
It's
have
not
that
really
knife,
happening to you. Racism isn't real. Don't do it.
yeah.
And if she hadn't fucking had her bag,
Mhm.
this man would have raped her.
Yep.
He would have raped her. He would have assaulted her. He would have tied her up
Mhm.
and left her there. He goes to find her when she runs up the stairs to go check her shit.
Mhm.
And he opens the door to the attic and he doesn't even look at her. He looks around to make sure they are alone.
Yeah. And she's
He
like,
looks
oh
around
no.
to make sure that she is by herself. She sees him look around. And in that moment, like, this is what I'm saying, right? There's a question in the back of this book for like study groups and stuff,
Mhm.
right? And one of the questions is, how do you feel this story would have changed
Mhm.
if Dana had, like, if Kevin had never gone back in time, right?
Mhm.
How would this story have been different if Dana had gone back in time just like alone, solo,
Yeah.
right? Or, you know, like little bits and pieces. And I think this is actually one of the questions, right? Is like this moment,
Mhm.
if Kevin hadn't been like, oh, this isn't a big deal, right? Or if she had allowed herself to be lulled into that like false sense of comfort,
Yeah.
this would have been the end of her story.
Yeah.
Like, this would have been it. And it would have been Kevin's fault. And this is somebody that is an intelligent and self-possessed woman.
Mhm.
And her safety literally comes down to two white dudes.
Yep.
Like, that is the most true thing in the world.
Mhm.
Like, my personal safety, I was pulled over one day by two police officers. Nothing was wrong with my car. I must have fit a description. They had no reason to pull me over. They sent me off with no ticket. Didn't even check my license and registration. Like, it was shortly before COVID had happened. The first police officer approached my car normally. The second officer had his hand on his weapon. They did not pull me over until I had leaned over and they could see through my back window that I had curly hair. I think it was my hair that gave me away that I had coarser hair
Mhm.
and not straight hair. And like, I drive a nice car. There's no need for that. I drive a Mini Cooper.
Mhm.
Like, it's not like I'm, you know, I look like I am up to no good or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, which, I mean, what does that say about you if you think somebody in a not nice car is up to no good? But whatever.
Mhm.
So so like, whatever. He like has his hand on his gun. And Jason, my partner, was in the passenger seat
Mhm.
and leaned around me as I rolled the window down. And I didn't even get a word out of my mouth because I was terrified.
Mhm.
And he goes, "Hey, officers, can I help you?" He goes, "Candace, let me handle this." "Hello, how can I help you today?" "Oh, sorry about that. This, we must have stopped the wrong people." All of a sudden, oh no.
Yeah.
They see Jason, hand comes off the weapon. All of a sudden, there's all smiles, sunglasses get taken off. Just having a conversation, buddy.
Yeah.
Having a talk, chum, right? But like, if it had just been me in that car, who knows what would have happened?
Yeah.
Who knows? You're approaching me for not doing anything wrong. I have not had a ticket in forever.
Mhm.
9 years.
Mhm.
I haven't been ticketed. Completely clean license, right? Been to traffic school one time
Mhm.
in the 20 years I've been driving, almost. So, like, if I had been there by myself and I hadn't said something that they liked or I made them feel uncomfortable, how would my life have changed, right?
Mhm.
I should not have to rely on my white partner being there to feel safe on a Tuesday morning driving to work.
Yeah.
That's crazy, right? But that's my life. That's my life. When I go places, do I like just going off by myself and just like driving just to drive, man? Just traveling the winding roads of the countryside? No.
No.
No, I do not. I like the buddy system.
Mhm.
And I don't want to rely on my male white partner's
Yeah.
like privilege to be okay, because how many people out there can't rely on that,
Mhm.
don't have somebody like that? You know what I mean? It's not awesome to think about the fact that, like, I mean, granted, every woman goes through this too, right? Like, you're at a party, somebody spikes your drink, you've only had two, you think you're going to be fine with just two drinks, but somebody has spiked it, so now you're hammered.
Mhm.
You can't protect yourself. It's up to every single dude at that party
Mhm.
to be a decent human being and not put their hands on you, right?
Yep.
Like, your safety is now in someone else's hands completely because somebody decided to take that from you. And that's essentially what's happening to Dana.
Mhm.
That almost happens to Dana. I mean, granted, it's still happening to her because Rufus is making the decision to force her into doing something that she doesn't want to do because he thinks that he's kind of at the end of his rope.
Mhm.
And it doesn't really matter now
Yep.
what happens next. He doesn't want her going back.
Yep.
So maybe he can make it so that, like, she stays, because he's kind of started to figure out that, like, she gets sent home when she feels like she's in danger.
Mhm.
So he's real nice about it, but
Yeah, he
obviously, like, he even
apologizes to
says,
her.
yeah, she even says, like, I could tell that his grip of my hand was one that was very soft and tender, but could quickly become painful and agonizing
Mhm.
if I didn't do what he wanted. Like, there's a vibe. And I think that any woman who's ever felt unsafe,
Mhm.
you know what those moments before you feel unsafe, you know what that feels like. There's
Mhm.
like a frequency, there's like a hum in the air, there's like a, like, your hair kind of stands up on your arms a little bit, like your spider sense starts tingling and you're like, uh-oh, there's a fucking creep nearby. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Like, you get this moment where you're just like, I am unsafe as a woman, I need to stop.
Mhm.
You're walking to your car in the middle of the night and you hear footsteps behind you. You're at a party and somebody's staring at you a little too long. Like, a guy won't leave you alone on a dance floor. Like, whatever it is, right? These little tiny things that
Mhm.
these men do sometimes to, like, take that agency away from you,
Mhm.
whether they know they're doing it or not, right?
Mhm.
There's a feeling. And, like, reading this, that's exactly how I felt. Like, it was a lot. I had to put the book down. If you are somebody who's ever felt unsafe, this will be a big moment for you in this book.
Yeah.
Treat yourself with care and with caution. Recognize that this book is full of tons of all kinds of triggers. If you
Mhm.
are somebody who has felt as though your body has been handled by someone else without your permission in any way, shape, or form, there's going to be a lot of those moments here. I would not say to not read it because I think it's still absolutely validating and worth it.
Mhm.
But just throwing that out there, I had to stop for a minute. Like,
Yeah.
I had to take a second, because this is our heroine. She's done everything right.
Mhm.
She's played by the rules to the point where she's had to counsel somebody to just allow themselves to be raped
Mhm.
by somebody. Like, she has literally been through the ringer. She has no support system in the 20th century. She only has a support system, and a small one,
Mhm.
in the 1900s. And even the support that they give is more of the just shut up and take it, because that's what's helped them.
Yeah.
So it's rough. Like, this moment to me was a turning point that, like, again, I mean, very much like Dana, I was not surprised it was happening, but I was still surprised it was happening.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, how far gone is he? You know, like, you start this off thinking he could never be worse than Tom Whalen.
Yeah. And he's worse.
I mean, by far.
Yeah.
By far. Because to me, somebody who's going to be racist as a principle, right? That's part of who they are. They are
Mhm.
not ashamed of it, right? You can calculate what that person's going to do.
Mhm.
You know, if I talk back to Tom Whalen, he's going to feel minimized as a white guy and he's going to be in his feelings. So he's going to seek to embarrass me or humiliate me or put me in my place,
Mhm.
right? A plus B equals C.
Mhm.
Easy. Rufus, I mean, anything could set him off.
Yeah.
Anything.
The wind looks bad today. And
Yeah. Everybody is doing fucking doubles around the fucking field.
yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, even with Sam, there's a conversation that he has with Dana before he sells Sam where he's like, I would never with you. And they have that whole, like, friend zone conversation where she's like, ew, no. And he's like, ew, no, I know, right? No, I have Alice. And she's like, yeah, you have Alice. And, like, you need to be nicer to her so you can keep her. Like, she's, you know, she doesn't trust you. You need to,
Mhm.
like, work on that relationship. Like, they have a whole conversation about how Dana is off limits. She even has that conversation with Alice, and Alice is like, it's only a matter of time for you.
Yeah.
And Dana's like, what do you mean? No,
I was like,
he doesn't
no.
feel that way.
Yeah.
He doesn't feel that way until he feels that way.
Mhm.
I think he's always felt that way. I just think that Alice was a stand-in for Dana
Mhm.
more than Dana being a stand-in for Alice. I think that Dana has always been the big fish, personally.
I could see that. Now I can see that. I'll be honest,
Right?
it didn't even cross my mind. You know what I mean? Like that, like I knew he could do awful, horrible things, but until that conversation where he sold Sam, I did not think it was going to go that far.
Man, like I got the tiniest inkling because I started thinking about it. Like on this page, 256,
Mhm.
right? We're almost at the end of this book. Like there are literally like a handful of pages left to read. And I just was like, wait a minute. So Rufus meets Dana. She's his guardian angel.
Mhm.
Think about it from a child's perspective, right? He's 5 or however old he is when she saves him from drowning. His guardian angel is a black woman. It's confusing to him, or a black man, because he thinks she's a man. It's confusing to him because he's like, we own black people.
Yeah.
I was saved because I was supposed to be saved, whatever. So he kind of buries it. Then when he's a little older, right, she saves him from the fire.
Mhm.
You realize that he realizes that she's a woman.
Mhm.
He tells her she's kind of pretty, right? He talks to her about his life. They become fast friends, however much of a friend you can be to a slave owner.
Mhm.
Then like she comes back again when he's a teenager. He's noticed Alice.
Mhm.
He talks about her, the fact that she's pretty, right? But it's more offhand than anything.
Mhm.
She knows he's going to be with Alice because she knows about Hagar.
Yeah.
But like he's not like, oh yeah, Alice is my betrothed and I'll love her forever.
Mhm.
It becomes that. And part of me wonders, does it become that because he's obsessed with Dana? And the older Alice gets, the more she looks like Dana. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So she grows up into a Dana that he can have.
Mhm.
She won't have him. He can't have the other Dana. That's too much. So he goes to great lengths to procure the Dana he can have.
Yeah.
And when she's dead, it's fine. It's finally time for him to take the one that he actually wants.
I could see that. I really
Like
can.
that
Terrifying.
is
It's horrifying and it's disgusting. And it's like he is her many times great grandfather.
yeah.
I will say though, like, so Dana stabs him in the side, kills him, and then as she kills him, who runs in? Someone runs in. I forgot to write that down.
I think it's Nigel.
Nigel, you're correct.
Mm-hmm.
Nigel runs in, sees this happening, and is like, oh my God. And then Dana gets ripped from that time period. And I think the thing that's really chilling to me is the fact that his hand still on her arm is the reason her arm is ripped off.
Yep.
The thing that terrifies me though is that imagine what would happen if he succeeded.
Yeah.
She'd be ripped apart.
Yes. Yes.
Like there'd be nothing of her to send back.
No. And I think that's the point.
Yeah. That
I think that's the
terrifies
point. Because she will be scared for her life in a way that won't send her back.
Yeah.
Like when a person is raped, I shouldn't even say a woman because obviously anybody can be raped. But when somebody is raped, right? Unless that person has like a gun to your head or a knife, right? You might not be afraid for your life.
Mm-hmm.
You're afraid for like your psyche. You're afraid for your spirit. You're afraid for the parts of your body that are going to be broken, but you're not like, when this is over, I'm going to die. And for many people, that's the worst part, right? Is that you now have to live with this stain on you for the rest of your life, right? And he finally, like, whether he knowingly does this or it's just a progression of his madness and his total depravity, but he puts her in a position where she is afraid for her life, but not in a way that is going to transport her home.
Yeah.
So she would not have been whole. She would not have been normal. She would have, there, like you said, there would have been nothing to send back. But again, there wouldn't have been a reason to send back because she wouldn't have felt like she was going to die.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? It wouldn't have been a trauma great enough for her to get transported back to her time and finally save her life. And that is, again, it's never really said. I think Butler purposely leaves this open-ended to allow the reader to kind of like take up that space with their own imagination and their own mind and their own perspectives. But I do think that there is a reason that for that, you know what I'm saying? If she hadn't been able to assert herself, if she hadn't been able to put hands on him, if she hadn't been able to mitigate what was surely going to happen to her, if she had left her bag behind as her husband wanted her to, I don't think she would have ever been able to go home again because she would have been so changed by that that I don't think anything would have sent her home after that, short of actually killing herself.
Yeah.
And even then, like you said, there'd be nothing to send.
Yeah.
Like, terrifying. And like, even how it happens, right? Like, he's clamped onto her arm,
Mm-hmm.
and she teleports back. And obviously it's like symbolic, but it also is like logical, right? Like, something's on her arm. She can't access her arm. When she comes back, that has to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the terms. Those are the terms of her condition, right? Like, if she's on the floor, balled up in a fetal position, that's normally how she finds herself
Mm-hmm.
back in her time, right? Like, in that same hunched over position, or laying face down,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever position her body is in, right? So we should expect that something would happen to her arm. But I also feel like it's a larger commentary on the fact that a part of her will forever be back in the 1800s.
Yeah,
Forever.
for sure.
Like, it is unbreakable. It is irreversible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fact that they take her arm as a writer, like, that's huge, especially because she has a hard time even recording what's happening to her. Like, everything she writes, she throws away. She even makes it a point to talk about the things that she goes away and writes sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and then burns after, because it's just for her. It's not for anyone else. It's not for Kevin. He's never read any of it. Like, she makes it a point to have writing to validate herself and her experience that even her partner doesn't have any access to.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, the amount of loneliness in that thought, like, yes, it's good to have your own stuff, but she has that because she knows that she can't seek solace with her partner.
Mm-hmm.
And flashing back to the beginning of the book, where like she's trying to explain what happened to her,
Mm-hmm.
that to me is the part that's the most chilling, because you realize that, like, she doesn't want to explain what happened to her.
Mm-hmm.
After that conversation about, well, did he do that thing to you that I can't say? And by that I mean, did he rape you? Did you have consensual sex with him?
Yeah.
Worse. Did you have consensual sex with him? How is she supposed to talk about that with him now that her arm is ripped off?
I can't imagine she would. I don't think she said a single thing about it. Like, I don't think she ever tells him.
Like, we know that she says nothing even in the hospital.
Yeah.
She stays silent the whole time. For pages.
Mm-hmm.
She stays absolutely silent. And when the police ask, did Kevin do this? All she can say is no.
Yeah.
But very similar to how Rufus killed Alice,
Mm-hmm.
Kevin definitely played a role in her arm being missing.
Mm-hmm.
110%.
Yeah. And like, the worst thing too is like, she thinks about it. Like, while this is happening, she's like, can I follow through with stabbing him?
Yep.
And
yep. Like, she's literally down to a him or me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it takes for her to kill him. It's a him or me. And even then, she feels bad.
Mm-hmm.
What about the people I left behind? What's going to happen to them?
Yeah.
Did I pick the right time? Was it wrong of me to do that at that moment?
Yeah.
Like, she has to question whether or not her choice to remain safe and intact, which, like, that's crazy too. The idea that in order to remain sane and intact, she has to lose something.
Mm-hmm.
She can't just be okay. She literally has to give up a piece of herself to be whole.
Yep.
To stay whole. Like, that's, like, this book is fantastic.
I know.
This is one of the best books I think I've ever read in my life. It changes me every time I read
Mm-hmm.
it. And like, I just, even if you are not a Black person, I think the idea, especially if you are a survivor
Mm-hmm.
of abuse or of any kind of violence or trauma, the idea of having to give something up to be okay, especially if you go to therapy, like, that is not a new idea. A lot of people have to give things up to be okay long term, right? And seeing this person that we're so invested in have to make that decision, knowing this entire time she's going to lose her arm, and then in the last like 4 pages of the book she loses her arm as a way to prevent the entire destruction of her person.
Yeah.
Like, you've been reading this book now for 260 pages, and you find out she has no arm because she chose that instead of absolute destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's like, what a way to end a character story arc.
Yeah.
Like, what a way.
I know. This book ruined me.
Yeah, man. Like, it breaks you down, it builds you back up, and then it smashes all your Legos, and then you step on them.
I know. Like, I feel like even just after this recording, I'm gonna have to take a nap. Like, I'm gonna just have to not be a person for a little bit.
I feel you. I have a little bit of a headache. I totally feel
Right?
you. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
But sometimes I think that those are the texts that are the most worth
Oh,
reading.
yeah.
Like, I don't know if you've read Bachelorette of Carolina by Dorothy Allison. That is a story of a poor, rural, low income family in the sticks. Excellent book. Very, very hard read. It is, I think, either autobiographical or semi-autobiographical. She's a survivor. She lived an incredibly challenging life. It is a slog. It is extremely hard to read. Similar to this one, if not a little worse, because you know that there's truth to what she's saying. I mean, granted, there's truth to this as well. This is very well researched, very well put together. You learn while you read Kindred about the time period and about what happened. You learn a lot of facts that you might not know, even if you've studied this before. It is an exhaustive report of antebellum slavery, right? Of slavery in the South. However, there are some fantastic points, right? Dana is not a real person. These are not real people that you're talking about, right? In Bachelorette out of Carolina, she is a real person who's telling her own story. So there's like, it just hits very different when you're reading it because it's a firsthand narrative of this trauma that this person encountered. But like, again, a book like that, while it is hard to read and it is sad and you will cry and you will feel very bad, like reading someone's testimony of their life, to me, like there's no greater honor. And that's how I feel about this book, right? Even though this isn't like one person's testimony of an actual thing that happened to them, it is the testimony of hundreds of thousands of Black people who have lived, been born, been kidnapped, and then died in or around slavery. And the long-lasting markings that it has led on African American people and honestly Black people around the world. There are plenty of people, Black British people, I'm sure, feel this way. Black Portuguese people, right? Anybody that lives in a place that used to have slaves and is in that place because of slavery. I mean, you look at Haiti, right? Haiti is, a slave colony. That whole country was made up by people who were able to escape to freedom, and yet now is one of the poorest countries in the world, right? So why? How did that happen?
Yeah. Oh, I wonder.
Because nobody wanted to help them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Nobody wanted to help them. So people who were like, oh, like Trump was like, those shithole countries. I'm like, yeah, and how'd they get that way? Those were people who fought for their freedom and failed.
Yeah.
Right? Or they won the freedom and then everybody was like, well, now you don't need our help anymore because, you're free, right? That's what you wanted.
Yeah.
It's like that petty, like, you said you didn't need us. You know what I mean? Which is exactly how Black Americans were treated until, I mean, even today still sometimes.
Yeah.
Like it's a lot. And I like that she gives us an epilogue. I really needed the epilogue. In some books, I'm just like, I don't care. It's over.
Yeah, literally.
There's nothing else you could say to me. But in this book, I was like, is there something else, please?
Yeah.
Can you give me a silver lining?
I know. So in the epilogue, Dana and Kevin eventually go out to Maryland. They found out that Rufus died in a house fire. All the slaves were sold. Dana thinks Nigel did this to cover up Dana's stabbing. They find out, though, that Nigel and Carrie were not listed on the people sold list. Correct. Which is interesting. And the thing that I think is the most interesting about that is that their kids are. Which means Nigel understands enough that Carrie cannot really get sold again. Like, Carrie cannot speak. So he had to sacrifice his children and his family to get his wife to safety.
That's right.
So basically, him and his wife are considered dead pretty much.
Yeah.
And then at the end, like, there's this moment where Dana's like trying to say about like how she didn't want to have had to kill Rufus because of this moment. And Kevin's like, you need to stop defending him. And it's like, she's not.
No.
She's not.
No. And she's even telling him, she says, yeah, it's self-defense. She never tells him what happened in those final moments. And you know that is a direct result of how he reacted the first time.
Yes.
And so now this person is in the 20th century and they still have to deal with that trauma alone.
Yes.
Like,
And no one can possibly relate to her. That's the worst part too, is she doesn't have
yep,
Sarah, she doesn't have Alice, she doesn't have Tess, who all kind of were able to relate to her and the things she went
yep,
through. She is
yep.
no one.
There's your arm metaphor,
Mhm.
right? An arm has hands, a finger attached,
Mhm.
right? Fingers attached, something that helps give you reach, something that helps you feel connected,
Mhm.
helps you interpret touch,
Mhm.
right? Gives you the most human of sensations.
Yeah.
And hers is gone,
Yeah.
quite figuratively and quite literally, right?
Mhm.
Like, she now has this unspeakable secret.
Mhm.
She has a man that she now knows doesn't really have her back and
Yeah.
her best interests in mind. Um, Part of the reason Rufus was able to control her is because, in his own way, Kevin told him how,
Yeah.
you know, and she kind of has to be with him
Mhm.
because who else could she be with?
Yeah.
Who else is going to understand when she has these moments, right? But she still leaves with a secret, and she still leaves without family and that bond and that connection.
Mhm.
So, yeah, a piece of her literally will always be in the past with her arm,
Mhm.
but a piece of her figuratively in her heart is always stuck in the past. The only time that she has ever felt seen and
Mhm.
heard and known and understood, and will never feel that way again. And then Kevin has the gall to end this fucking book
Mhm.
by saying, now that Rufus is dead, we have some chance of staying sane. And I'm like,
Ah,
we?
you.
You think she's gonna be sane?
Yeah.
If she, imagine if she went through Alzheimer's or dementia. Like, imagine
Yeah.
that, right? Imagine she's 60, 70 years old and she's getting up there and maybe it takes her, right? People with Alzheimer's or dementia flash back to previous moments in their lives. What
Mhm.
happens if she goes back to there?
Yeah.
Like, we have a chance of staying sane now that that boy is gone, as though it was all his fault. We end the book
Yeah.
with Kevin taking no responsibility or interest in
Uh-huh.
his wife's healing. That's how we end the
And
book.
it's like she can't go to a therapist. Like, what are you gonna say?
No. I mean, back then, people didn't even do therapy at that
Yeah.
point. In the 70s,
Like, imagine though that
hippies did
this is
therapy.
right now and you could go to therapy. Like, you can't. You
No.
cannot. There's no way to explain
They'll
this
Baker
thing.
Act you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. She touches the scar that Tom Whalen's boot leaves on her face, touches her empty left sleeve. Like,
Mm.
she's left with an actual emptiness
Yeah.
and is forever changed by this.
Mhm.
And he's like, time to move on.
I know. I don't. I. I don't know how Dana could possibly stand to live with him for the rest of her life.
Again, I think it's an understanding of what it means to be put upon.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying, right? She passes such harsh judgment on Sarah
Mm-hmm.
about being this mammy archetype, right?
Yeah.
And how she just puts up with anything. And now she's like, "Oh, this is why you get driven to put up with
Mm-hmm.
anything, because the alternative is worse." And for her, I imagine being alone after suffering through this trauma is way worse.
Oh yeah.
Like, that's way worse. The only good thing that I can say about this ending is that her lack of one arm
Mm-hmm.
means that he won't ask her to fucking be his secretary. That's like the one good thing
Yeah.
that I can say about the way that this
I
ends,
know.
is that he can no longer take advantage of her in the same way. But, like, what is that? That is not
Yeah.
a silver
I
lining.
know. It's so bad. That was a lot. Such a good
So
book.
if you guys are reading this version that we're reading, it is a cover that has a really pretty black woman on it, looking kind of down, and then you can see like the houses from the plantation on the bottom, and it's kind of like a sepia tone kind of effect, sort of. Um, the reader's guide in the back. I did read the critical essay by Robert Crossley. I learned a couple of interesting things. It's good, but it's also something that's very easy to skim, and it basically talks about like the history of the slave narrative and how contemporary authors are also using that, like Toni Morrison's Beloved or Dessa Rose, which is another one that I read by Shirley Ann Williams. Um, it talks about the way that Kindred was received, apparently the entire city of Rochester, New York, they have an annual tradition called everyone in Rochester reads the same book. And this was their third choice, like their third year they were doing it. They
Mhm.
did this book. And apparently this is, and I mean, and I think we already kind of talked about this, how different this is from her other works. Her other works are, again, she still centers conversations about race, gender, intersectionality, right?
Mhm.
Very much at the center of all of her writings. But this book is one that is unique because she actually was against it being marketed as sci-fi. Because she's like, there's no science in this book.
Yeah.
If anything, it's dark fantasy,
Mhm.
if anything, which I can understand. But I think time travel automatically puts you in the sci-fi
Yeah.
category, which honestly I don't really mind
Yeah.
because I think that the science doesn't really matter. Like, there's no explanation. Like, you're not meant to dissect whether or not if you broke open the wall of Dana's house, is her arm in there, right? Like, that's not. This is not about logic.
Yeah.
And I think it's not about logic because what happens to her and what happened to millions of Black people
Mhm.
coming over from Africa and being ported and sold like chattel, like animals or so many livestock,
Mhm.
right? There was no logic there.
Yeah.
That was an illogical moment in time of great greed and selfishness.
Mhm.
And I think that the idea that people are no longer capable of doing that and that we shouldn't talk about it because it's the past is hubris at best and poisonous at worst.
Yeah.
I think that this book, if it does anything well, is to prove that vigilance is something that we need. I mean, she is horribly unprepared to go back to this time. And
Mhm.
I would argue that somebody who is, I mean, she's 27. She turns 27 in the past when she's there.
Mhm.
I would argue that the average 27-year-old, like, I mean, you're 25?
23 right now. I'll be 24 in March. I don't know, man. It's been a weird couple years. Okay.
I feel you.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, you're 23,
Mhm.
right? So for you, like, as a white person, you would have a hard time being transported back to the early 1800s,
Yeah.
right? Let alone like dealing with people of color or slavery at all. Just as a woman
Mhm.
and as a modern person, going back to this time period would be a lot,
Yeah.
right? Um, if this book were rewritten from the perspective of a modern 27-year-old Black woman, that would be a disaster. I imagine that person would last maybe a day.
Yeah.
Because, like, again, you're not used to needing to behave a certain way in some circles
Mhm.
necessarily, right? Like, you're not used to being a little quieter around a certain type of person. Like, you're used to being out and loud and proud and,
Mhm.
the Black Lives Matter movement. And you're used to, seeing like pictures of, your ancestors or people who came before you fighting for civil rights. Like,
Mhm.
there's all this, like, there's all these other examples of how to be. Whereas, like, Dana had very few
Yeah.
and she struggled.
Mhm.
So, like, it's just interesting to me to think, like, how different this would be if it were published now versus
Mhm.
before, and how different this is from the rest of Butler's books. Like, if you read any of her other books, it's nothing. They're nothing like
Yeah.
this. They are strong sci-fi, right?
Mhm.
So they're set in space. There's a colony on Mars. There's a vampire that's a black vampire.
I
You know what I
have
mean?
that
Like,
book
things
now.
like that.
I Yeah,
Fledgling.
I grabbed it.
It's very strange. Stick with it.
Okay. I got the audio
Um,
book, so we'll see how that goes.
So that's what I listen to too. Bonnie Turpin is pretty
Mhm.
good. She does a lot of African American and BIPOC books.
Okay.
Actually, she's super dynamic voice too. She can kind of encompass a lot of different vibes. So I definitely recommend. That's the version that I listen to as
Okay.
well. The one that you're about to listen to. Um, and something else I think that this like little afterword points out is like the names of the chapters and like the significance there, which I think
Mhm.
we discussed a
Yeah.
little bit, like why each chapter is called that, how it's divided into like the journey of both Dana and Rufus
Mhm.
and what kind of sets them off.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, if you listeners get this book, definitely do yourself the favor of reading the Reader's Guide. It's actually a pretty decent one. A lot of times it kind of feels thrown together. But this is very well researched. It gives you a really nice selected bibliography of Octavia Butler's, as well as notes that led to this person's reading of the book,
Mhm.
and then some discussion questions at the end in case you wanted to do something like this
Okay.
yourself and kind of ask your friends or whatever to talk to you or read this book with you. um it's a very important book, in my opinion, far more important than I think anyone really knows, because it has not received the airtime that I think it deserves.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people don't read these days. They read like online stuff or whatever. They don't like actually like pick up a book, which part of it is like the number of hours that you have to work and the amount of money you make for those hours has gone completely bananas, and people have to work like a million hours just to like make ends meet.
Yeah.
So I understand why people don't read like they used to. I understand why I don't read like I used to. I'm a huge bookworm. My whole house is filled to the brim with books, and there's more and more of them that I do not have time to read, but I still keep collecting them because one day I'm going to be old, damn it, and I'm going to read all my books.
I can't wait to retire. Oh my gosh.
I'm going to be a reading fool. Where's Book It then? Does Pizza Hut still have Book It? They better. Not that I would eat the Pizza Hut, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. I mean well. But yeah, I just, this is a stunning novel in more ways than one. Her ability, Octavia Butler's ability to write a character from a place of unmissable understanding. I feel like pretty much anybody could read this and feel away. I think it would take a lot for someone to read this and feel nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the best kinds of books. Like, there are a lot of modern like novels, especially like horror and things like that are more my wheelhouse, that I like pick up, you know, fantasy, whatever, that lack a purpose. They lack a perspective. They lack any kind of understanding of what they're discussing, right? There's no greater meaning. It's just a snapshot, or it's just something weird that happens. But I feel like the greatest novels are those that do more than just transport us and you know, expand our imaginations. They're also those that deeply root us in the world that we live in as well, right? And it gives you a new way to think about something, a new and fresh perspective. And to me, this is probably one of the most successful novels as far as really trying to not just educate, not just inspire, but also underscore the past while kind of shining a different light on one's future or present. And like, I'm really thankful that you agreed to read this with me. Like, I'm such a fan.
I'm so glad, because I was nervous because it's not technically probably considered modern classics, but I was like looking at the time period, and I was like, and I read the like synopsis, and I was like, it's going to be a modern classic to me. Like,
yeah,
it's hard because like sometimes I feel like there's with my podcast, when I say I discuss modern classics and classic literature, people really want to file away what is a modern classic, and modern classic is still something that's being developed. And this is my podcast, so what I say goes. So
well, I mean, part of it too, though, like anybody that comes to you and says this isn't a modern classic is absolutely wrong, because she was the first known Black sci-fi author, let alone Black female sci-fi author. She has inspired dozens, if not hundreds, of writers since coming out, right? The other day, so perfect example, right? The Oscars. Only one Black woman has ever won for Best Actress. Only 4 have ever been nominated.
Oh my God.
The Oscars have been going on for almost 100 years.
Yeah.
Like, alone going, Halle Berry is the first Black woman to win. That's even worse, right? When you find out it's Halle Berry for Monsters Ball, because that took place after 2000, right? That's even worse when you realize it's been like the last 20 years a Black person won Best Actress, right? That's even worse. We've never had a Black person win for Best Director.
Oh my God.
You see what I'm saying? So like, those facts aren't things that like keep you up at night. You're not like walking to the grocery store and you're like, you know what I thought about? Like, it's not something that's like going to come up. But when you realize it, it makes you go, oh, racism though.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're immediately like, hold on.
It's not,
especially when you,
the worst thing is too, is, you know, it's not because like they are any less an actress than they're, you know, and then like people are like, well, you're nitpicking. And I'm like, am I though? Because
no,
you know, it's it's just a little suspicious.
It's super suspicious. If I told you every year I give away a prize and I win every year, that's very suspicious. So like, you know what I mean? So kind of taking that idea of, you know, the statistics look worse than the reality, right? The reality is, oh yeah, well, you know, but maybe, all those movies are just a coincidence, right? You can say that just when it's on paper.
Mm-hmm.
But when you actually think about the statistics of it, right? How many people have been nominated versus how many people have won? I think the number of Black directors to even be nominated is disgustingly small.
Yeah.
Like when you really take the data and you compare it, then you're like, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Right. So going back to modern classics and the definition of modern classics, right? So the idea of a classic is something that has a long lasting effect
Mm-hmm.
on both writers and readers.
Yeah.
Right. That's what a classic is. A modern classic would be, then we would understand that to be something that was written, I'd imagine, that needle is moving because we're moving forward in time. So once upon a time, I'm sure it was after the 1800s is modern classic. Now I'm sure it's probably after the 1900s is modern classic, right? Because we're in the 2000s. So just by virtue of that, this is a modern classic. It was written in the 1900s. It has inspired multitudes of people, of all different backgrounds and races, to write and to become writers and to, stick by their authorship, et cetera, so on and so forth. She paved all kinds of roads for people, right? So just by that standard, it is a modern classic. However, something that I think I would challenge anybody who tries to say that this isn't a modern classic or what does that mean or whatever, right? And break that down, because our world is extremely racist and has been racist for some time. If you do a show that's just modern classics, where do you have space for Black authors? Because Black authors weren't really published, which means you're only going to be reading white people.
Yeah.
Right? You're not really going to be reading women unless it's like Mary Shelley, who originally published under a pseudonym, or like George Eliot, or right? You're not going to be like getting like the feminist perspective in there, how the women struggle. You're going to be getting men writing narratives about women like they know. Right? Like there's a lot that you're just not going to get. I mean, the Harlem Renaissance, 1920s America, right? 1920s New York. If those aren't modern classics, I don't know what are. But if you say, oh no, well, J.M. Barrie is a modern classic, right? Peter Pan, modern classic. Or Huck Finn, that's a modern classic. Okay, well, Huck Finn's got N-word Jim in it. So, that's what I'm reduced to. I'm reduced to, because when those stories were written, people were still picking cotton with their bare hands and getting, strung up in a tree somewhere to, prove that they hadn't whistled at some white lady. You know what I mean? Like that's what Black people were busy doing. We weren't like chilling at our typewriter, like writing things, casually. Right? So it's like, I think that there's a lot of academia that needs to take a hard look at itself in the mirror. Yeah. Right. There's actually a really great show on this topic called The Share. It's on Netflix. It's a short, limited series. It's only about 6 or 8 episodes long. And I think they're going to do another season, but I'm not positive. It's starring Sandra Oh. And essentially, she is the first woman of color, the first woman and the first person of color, both at the same time, to lead this English department at a prestigious university, right? And she has all of these tenured professors that are all old white guys that are settled in. They're teaching the same thing they've been teaching for 50 years, right? They're teaching, all the stuff you always read, right? Twain. They're teaching, the romantics. They're teaching, existential people. They're teaching, Walden Pond. They're teaching, you know what I mean? Like all that shit, right? They're teaching exactly what you would expect, right? Thoreau, whatever. But kids today are reading Moby Dick going, so this is just about white supremacy?
I haven't read Moby Dick, so give me nothing else.
This white teacher is like, what? No, it's about man's inner struggle. And this like 50% person of color, 50% younger white children who are like too smart for that shit are like, can we talk about the implications though? Why aren't there any women in this book? Yeah. So like, that's what I'm saying. Like modern, like who decides what a modern classic is at that point? Because like those men, those are modern classics. That's what they grew up with. That's what they believe. That's what we're all taught in school, right? I grew up having to read all that stuff. There are a lot of books by white dudes that I have not read because I've just refused. Everybody else is reading them. They don't need more readers. Yeah. You know what I mean? I just go, no, thank you. Moving on. Maybe one day when on a lark, I'll read them. But right now, I mean, it's not really changing my life. I think the only book that I've really read that's like a modern classic that really like did something for me by like a mainstream regular white author that everybody is like, oh Jesus, he's so great, is The Great Gatsby.
Oh, love The Great Gatsby.
That book is spectacular. Oh, yeah. Like I will not hear a bad word about it, right? But like you get something like To Kill a Mockingbird, that took a lady to write.
I haven't read that yet.
Apparently, like you've never read it? Oh my God, honey, it's gonna change your
That's
world.
What Daniel told me. He said that's someone I have to find. I have to find someone to read that with me. Haven't.
It is.
No one's read it.
It's a great counterpart to this book. It's a great counterpart to this book. If you need somebody, I will come back and I will read that with you.
We could do it.
It is so good.
We could do it if you want to. Listen, don't tempt me
Oh,
with a
it's
good
so
time. Let's
good.
do it.
Listen, I'm down because it is so good.
Excellent.
And I found out the other day that Harper Lee, the
Mhm.
author, right? She had a story in her heart and she was like, yo, I keep dreaming about this story. I need to write this story. I got to get it. Her friends for Christmas banded together and raised enough money to pay her like 6 months salary so that she could quit her job and write one of the greatest American novels ever written. That's the story of To Kill a Mockingbird.
That's
like,
so cool.
Mind blowing. It's the coolest thing ever. Her friends were like, we believe in you, girl. You could do it. And she did it. And she did the
Imagine
damn thing.
friends
Let me
that
tell
good.
you.
Like,
Listen,
oh my God.
Listen, my whole life, right? So like, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, I think that so much goes into what a modern classic is. To me, it should be less about, you know, the test of time and more about what it says to people now.
Yeah.
How relevant is your book now, right? We're reading Kindred. It's all about 1976. We're talking about 1976 modern,
Yeah.
right? We're being like dumb about it. But like, it still matters. I can still take so much away from this text. When I read Tom Sawyer, what am I taking away other than you can trick somebody into painting a fence for free? Like, what am I getting out of that? Am I getting a snapshot of the white experience through the eyes of an 11-year-old boy in the 1800s? Maybe. Maybe that's what I'm getting. Do I need that? Is that changing my life any? Is it going to help me in my race relations or dealing with people who are different than me? No.
I know. I've decided to open up modern classics. Like, when I agreed to this book, I was like, I threw caution to the wind. Like, this was
I think
one
that's
of the
good.
bigger risks I took. Not really. But like, this was like a defining moment for the podcast in my mind where I was like, I don't really care what everyone considers a modern classic. I want to read things that I want to read. So here we go.
And that's excellent because, again, like, it is taking people in the literary sphere time, right? They actually had a scandal a few years ago. They decided to try to be more inclusive, right? But instead of like opening up the number of spots that they have for writers of color, they instead, like Scholastic was like, send us your manuscript. If you're a Black creator, send us your manuscript. We'll read it and we'll tell you if we want to publish it. I never heard hide nor hair. I submitted. They did not go with me. No salt, right? My work was good, but like, I know that I can self-publish. It's not a big deal. Like, I'm not like gonna cry about it, right? It's not, I don't feel rejected. They just went with someone else. But who did they go with? Who knows? I don't think they ever followed up, right? There was another publisher, I think it was Random House or Penguin maybe. They had some classics that they had in their catalog. They had people of color who were artists come up with new covers for the books, right? That were more inclusive covers. And at first I was really excited because I love art. Like, I love artwork. I love book artwork. It's really awesome. I feel like the cover of a book can make or break it sometimes in a big way. That's probably wrong because you shouldn't judge a book by its cover.
We all
like,
do.
The best cliche of all time. But let's be honest. When you're standing at Total Wine or the liquor store and you're looking for something to drink, you're not like, oh, this label's so ugly, I'm sure this wine is delicious. Like, that's not what happens. You know what I'm saying? I've been tricked by many a beautiful bottle of excessively mediocre wine. So that's what I'm saying about a book. Like, you got to at least put your best foot forward, right? It doesn't have to be, you know, spectacular. You don't have to have like, you know, fireworks and shit and like, you know, you open the book and it plays a little song. Like, you don't have to have anything crazy, but like, it's got to look right, you know? And I think that that's what drew me in at first, is that they had gone out of their way to hire Black artists, to pay Black people. That's awesome. But then somebody was like, yeah, but what happens in Little Women when you like turn the page and they're talking about Meg's creamy white skin? And I'm like, that does happen. That is a little rough. I understand how you feel, right? And like, some people are like, oh, well, why don't the Black people just write their own stories? Like, racism isn't a problem and being published isn't a problem. And the greatest fucking writer of Black comics so far in life hasn't been white dude Brian Michael Bendis. Like, you know what I'm saying? It hasn't been like white people going, you know what? We need more people of color. Let me write one, instead of, hey, person who's not in comics and probably doesn't have a portfolio, but you do really good writing otherwise, can you write me something? Which is what's starting to happen, right? Like Roxane Gay writing for Black Panther, for example, right? She's not a comic book author, but she did a great run, right? It should be from your heart. So I think that when you are going through and you are making these decisions, you are part of this next generation of critics. You know what I mean? People were not happy. They felt like it was just too little too late, because there are a lot of Black people that are getting like told by their white editors, oh, tone this down.
Mhm.
This is too critical. This is too tough. No one's going to want to read this. You're digging too deep. This is really graphic,
Yeah.
things like that, right? They're being combative, and they're not being understanding and welcoming and open
Mhm.
to the fact that like you can't judge every book the same. Like you can't walk into a room with Danielle Steele and Octavia Butler and tell them that they both need to have really pleasant copies of their books. Like they're completely different genres. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like they're never going to be the same. You can't judge one woman's experience by the other. You have to come at it from a more personal perspective.
Mhm.
Whereas when you're dealing with white authors, they have more of a shared background and a shared experience because they're not going through the additional layers,
Yeah.
right? And even then, if you're dealing with somebody who's a survivor and is writing a memoir, you're not going to deal with them the same way you're going to deal with Larry the Cable Guy writing his memoir. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like that's just common sense, but people don't always exercise that towards authors of color, whether they are Black, white, Asian, if they're like a biracial white minority or something like that, or if they're Jewish,
Mhm.
or you know what I mean, or if they're Italian, if they have some kind of nationality and ethnicity that people misunderstand, or there are stereotypes galore for,
Mhm.
right? And I think that because of that kind of incongruence there, you're seeing a lot of smaller publishers, right? You're seeing a lot of people doing self-publishing. Vashti Harrison has a really beautiful set of children's books that she published herself that are immensely popular and led to her
Mhm.
success, right? She gambled on herself because nobody else wanted to publish her. She sat down with a bunch of, Random House, Scholastic, all of that. They didn't publish.
Mhm.
They were like, we're good. So she was like, fine, I'll make it myself. And now she has like 5 in her series or something like that, and people love it. I have her
Mhm.
books, you know? So I think that like the change comes from the people that it most affects.
No one I've actually talked to about this book has known what it was. Like no one has
Yeah.
ever heard of this book. I hadn't heard of this book until you told me about it. So
Yeah.
I hope that this is like a good episode and everybody enjoys it, and that you all will read the book yourself.
Same.
'Cause, but yeah.
It'll change your life.
Yeah.
It'll change your life for the better.
Absolutely.
Like there's been a lot of emotion on this call, and like to tell you that it's not an emotional book would be to do you a huge
Mhm.
disservice, dear listener.
It truly.
But I do think that you're doing the right thing listening to someone like Rachel,
Aw.
because I think that questioning the status quo is what ushers us into an exciting and you know just a really fertile future of equity and equality and people thinking about more than just themselves. Like being a person of color, you automatically have to think about other people than
Mhm.
yourself, because if you do not think about how a white person is going to feel about whatever it is that you're doing, you are not prepared for the fallout when someone has a problem with you, right? When somebody says something, I mean, again, bringing up what happened to me on Twitch, like I should have expected that someone was going to troll me. It sucks to
Mhm.
have to like go online, think you're going to do something fun, and expect to have a bad time. Like
Yeah.
that's not fun. That's not fun for anybody. And if I leave, does that change anything? No. So, in your case, you saying, fuck what other people think are modern classics. I'm going to define those rules for myself.
Mhm.
Like you're a leader in that space. And I think that it's something that a lot of publications and publishers are doing right now, are redefining what that means, redefining what makes a classic, redefining, again, like there's a company called Out of Print. They have 2 or 3 different Octavia Butler shirts. None of them are Kindred,
Mhm.
but they've got 2 or 3 shirts with her books on the
Love
front
that
of them
company.
because they recognized me too. They're one of my favorites. I love supporting them. And I think that, again, they're also change
Mhm.
makers. Like they're not publishers, but they are breathing life and shining light on books that have been overlooked by people that are definitely modern classics, that definitely matter, that have definitely changed and shaped the future that we are now experiencing of literature.
Mhm.
And I think that the more people that kind of question that, right, that put that out there, like you can't have Uncle Tom's Cabin as a modern classic but then not have the counterpoint to it.
Mhm.
You can't be reading just Uncle Tom's Cabin and that's your one snapshot of slavery in America,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the only modern classic. That would be like, the Criterion collection not having any Spike Lee in it.
Mhm.
You got to have Spike Lee in the Criterion collection. You've got to have, Akira Kurosawa in the Criterion collection. There's no Star Wars without Akira
Mhm.
Kurosawa. If there wasn't that Japanese filmmaker and his incredible vision, we would have no George Lucas the way that we have him
Yeah.
now, right? So like, I think a lot of people think that, it's weird or it's marginalizing to like put those things in there, or it's unnecessary. But this is a book that, very much like, the work of Akira Kurosawa, like this is a book that transcends race.
Mhm.
Is it about race? Yes. Do you have to be Black to read this and understand it and be changed by it? Absolutely not. And it takes people like you going, hey, this is worth it.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be changed by this. That's what literature and art are supposed to
Mhm.
do. They're supposed to be transformative. They're supposed to make the world a better place. They're supposed to make people feel seen and heard. And that's something that I think we desperately need right now. So, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I am forever thankful that we discussed this and that we did
Me
this,
too.
because, like, wow.
I know.
Wow.
I feel really good about it. I can't wait to see,
Yeah.
like, once more people start listening to it, I can't wait to see everyone's reactions.
Yeah. I really hope everybody reads it because it's
Mhm.
so good. And I hope I get to come back.
Yes. Come back. Come hang out with me. But, dear listeners, that is all we have time for today. Candace, where can all the people of the internet find you?
You guys can find me on YouTube and Instagram at Candace the Magnificent, all one word. You can also find me on Twitter at that Candace Girl, and then you can find me around the internet. Take a look at both of those platforms. I usually update you as to what I am doing. Coming up soon, I'm going to be on a couple of tabletop role playing game actual play streams. So if you are into tabletop role playing, or if you are into storytelling at all, definitely please follow me there. And hopefully you will also hear from me again on the Barely Bookish podcast in the
Yay.
future.
Yes. But we will catch you guys later in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Barely Bookish podcast. If you want to find me, I am at Barely Bookish on literally everything, so you can find me wherever you would like. Also, if you want more content, please consider joining the Patreon. For just as low as $1 a month, you get access to a bunch of bonus content, early access to episodes, and also you get access to the Patreon-only Discord. So lots of cool, fun stuff, and you can it's all donation-based, so you can join as low as $1 if you would like. But yeah, we're going to be doing Peter Pan, which is very, very exciting. I am very hyped for that. I hope you all will enjoy it. So make sure you start reading. Next week we will start with Peter Pan. So if you start reading now, then you'll be all caught up. But Peter Pan is going to probably be about 3 episodes. So that gives you an idea of how you should split it up. Okay. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will catch you all next week. Our logo was designed by my little sibling Sarah. Our theme song was by Raphael Crux. I'll catch you all later. Bye!